design planning. So what would you do there? What do we need to do? We need to look at network requirements. You need to assess integrations in former cast, billing systems, recording stuff. What are the requirements? What are the integrations that need to be mapped to WebEx calling? And then here, it's really important. I mentioned that briefly earlier, and I will say it again. Calling is not about features, right? No customer ever asked for translation patterns, right? They always had some business requirement. And because of the limited functionality of UCM, the only way, if you only have CSS's partitions and patterns, then the answer 100% of the time is, let's throw in a few translation patterns and make it work. All right, that's what I'm referring to. So calling is not about features, it's about business requirements. Call controls are different. UCM is fundamentally different from WebEx calling multi-tenant. You need to understand how these guys work. And if you're trying to map features one-to-one from your existing UCM to WebEx calling multi-tenant, chances are you're going to fail. All right? So there are different ways to address the same requirements or meet the same requirements. Take advantage of change. What I mean here, in certain areas, WebEx calling multi-tenant is way superior to UCM. Let me give you one example. One question that comes up a lot is when people try to move from UCM to WebEx calling multi-tenant, how many shared lines can I share this DN on 50 phones? And then you go, nah, actually, no, there's a limit. But then what you actually should be doing is you should ask them, why? Why would you even do that? What's the benefit of having 50 phones ringing at the same time? And in reality, chances are that you get the answer because that was the only way we could build a proper IT help desk on UCM without having to pull in contact center. Because that way, we could just create this IT help desk line, throw it on a bunch of phones, and everybody that was assigned this role could answer the incoming calls. So what would be then what should be the actual answer with WebEx calling multi-tenant should be get rid of this this stupid shared line, right? And just implement a proper call queue with queuing, announcements, and whatever. Let these guys log in, make them available, unavailable, and have a proper call distribution and get rid of this stupid shared line. All right, that's an example where it makes sense to not migrate what you have, but understand why it's there and come up with a better solution. All right. There are fundamental differences. I will quickly step through this between WebEx calling and UCM. In WebEx calling, the way this works is everything's user-based. Users have a phone number and/or extension. The shared line concept is completely different to WebEx calling. You can share users' TNs or the users on different users' phones. Users live in a location, and in UCM, technically in UCM, you don't even have to have users, right? Because everything is DN-centric. In UCM, you create your DNs in some partitions. You associate these DNs with devices, create line appearances. These devices might be owned by users or not. And if it weren't for licensing, there would be no reason to have users at all on UCM, right? And that creates this interesting scenario that if you look at existing UCM installations, sometimes it's actually kind of hard to determine what is Bob's extension, right? If you look at the end user table, there might be a primary extension configured or not. Then Bob might own a bunch of phones, and maybe all these phones have the same DN, but that's not necessarily required. So it's kind of hard sometimes to even determine these basic facts, right? Hand groups. Comparing hand groups, these more or less are reference slides. Hand groups between UCM and WebEx calling. How they are different. I think we don't need to necessarily walk through this. The important point here always is that we have things that look similar, but in detail work different. Gladly, in these examples, both in hunt groups and also call queues, WebEx calling is way more superior, has way more superior capabilities than UCM has. Dialing habits. Wasn't it great? UCM is the perfect playground when it comes to dial plans and dialing habits, right? Because when you install UCM, you start with a blank sheet, nothing's in there. You create all your DNs in your favorite none partition, right? And don't do anything. And complete failure. No, you don't do that. But my point is, you can come up with really, really complex designs and the weirdest dialing habits and dial plans. Typically in enterprises, we end up seeing something like this: extensions, abbreviated into side dialing, plus E164, and then country-specific dialing habits, right? And potentially countless variations based on this magic toolbox that you have. So when you take a look at a new UCM installation, all bets are off what you're going to find in this UCM installation. And if you look at 4 different companies and their 4 UCM installations, chances are you see 4 completely different approaches to dial plan design. Although for at least 15 years, there has been a recommended way to do it. Recommended by Cisco and in the SR&D and the PA. But I know that in reality, customers not necessarily followed this to the letter, right? In WebEx calling, it's different. In WebEx calling, everything's predefined. We have extensions, we have abbreviated intersite, and we have plus E164, and we have the country-specific PSTN dialing habits. The main difference is all of that is predefined. It's there when you fire it up. You don't have to do anything, right? So I'd say the UCM dial plan flexibility is a curse and a blessing. And since, maybe take that back. So based on limitations that UCM has in certain feature areas, we tended to abuse the dial plan flexibility a lot to address feature gaps. Let me give an example of what I mean. Customer has the requirement that they want to selectively enable or disable the caller ID for outbound calls. UCM doesn't have that feature. What's the answer? Throw in a bunch of translation patterns and then disable caller ID delivery. Customer wants to change caller ID for selective calls. What's the answer? Throw in a bunch of translation patterns and make it work. So when all you have is basically translation patterns and partitions, then the answer always is translation patterns, right? So that's what I mean by this down here, that the dial plan flexibility was often used as a workaround to address certain requirements, right? And when you try to migrate those, you're going to fail. Luckily, for a lot of these requirements that we were forced to address by dial plan workarounds, there are native options in WebEx calling that we can use. Okay. So you have to have a case-by-case conversation here. And luckily, after a long time, we gave all of you your favorite tool back. We now have actually translations in WebEx calling. So the world is a better place now. All problems are solved. You again can do translations in WebEx calling. Isn't that great? Hey. I expect a little more enthusiasm here. I mean, this is, so we can again do a lot of stuff, right? To implement specific dial plan requirements. And there are actually use cases where this makes a lot of sense. All right, dial plan principles. The goal is keep it simple. We have this predefined set. We have predefined national numbering plans. Everything's user-based, and we have this location concept. I mentioned that already. Nice. Shared lines. We used to have a severe limitation in WebEx calling that you couldn't share lines across locations. And that's the main reason I still have this slide in the deck. The same location limitation has been removed a long while ago. I just want to remind you of the fact that you now can share shared lines across location limitations. We introduced this concept of virtual lines. I mentioned earlier that everything in WebEx calling is user-based, which creates limitations if you need additional phone numbers to place calls for certain users, and there is no user, right? There is no additional user that you can assign this TN to. And that's why we introduced this concept of virtual lines. These virtual lines in WebEx calling are actual dummy users, if you want. Internally, they are actually treated as users. They have the exact same configuration options as users, like emergency callback numbers, incoming and outgoing calling permissions, barge setting, all of that stuff is there. And these virtual lines can be added to arbitrary phones as additional lines, as secondary lines. And that gives you a lot of flexibility. One of the main use cases that drove these virtual lines was the following. Insurance agency, we have agents that need to present phone numbers from different area codes depending on who they call to, who they call out to. Maybe even countries. Like when I talk to this customer, I need to, in the UK, I need to present a UK number. If I talk to this customer in Italy, I need to present an Italian number. Can be done. You just give this guy an additional virtual line on the phone, and the virtual line resides in Italy. And when they place the call using the Italy line, they basically use the Italian PSTN and present the Italian caller ID. The virtual lines can also be used as shared lines. So you can put an additional DN on a bunch of phones, in this case, phones of Alice, Bob, and Charlie as a secondary line. And if you want, that even gives you back this nasty, simple help desk that I mentioned earlier, sharing the help desk line across a bunch of phones, and all of them ring at the same time. And I still think the better solution for a help desk would be a call queue, or at least a hunt group that then selectively rings these phones based on availability. Question here.